Jan Doyle. Welcome to Wise Talk. Today's guest, I'm thrilled and extremely lucky to have her on this program. Her name is Randye Kaye, and she is a host for All Things Considered on NPR. I am so excited to have learned that. But she's also an actress, a keynote speaker, and an author. And she's here today to focus on her book that she wrote. And it is fascinating. And I just mentioned to Randye before the show, it is so extremely well written. I'm in a writing group right now, and she checks all the boxes of things that my writing coach says you should do. So I was very impressed. Welcome, Randye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me clear up the All Things Considered host. I am a local host, which means that their national programming comes to our NPR affiliate radio station, and I do the local news and local features. So if you turn on NPR in Colorado, you won't hear me.
Well, we don't want to listen in Colorado. We want to listen in Connecticut. But that's a very impressive position. I'm very impressed. I want to talk about your book. The title is Bend Behind the Voices, and then One Family's Journey from Chaos of Schizophrenia to Hope. Now, that is a lot to cover in this show, and I know this book is going to help other families. And I would like you to, before we start talking specifically about the book, I read in here that schizophrenia used to be called a nervous breakdown. And I remember seeing that term in literature a lot, in 1920s, 18th, 19th century literature. Mm-hmm. And now it's called schizophrenia. Can you tell us a little bit about the jump?
Sure. So I have to clarify that a nervous breakdown could be any number of things. It could be a manic episode of bipolar. It's anywhere where you lose control of your mind, basically.
Oh, interesting.
So what they've done now is have more specific diagnoses and names for specific serious mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. So psychosis itself, where somebody is having hallucinations or being very paranoid or seeing things that the rest of us don't see, that could be classified as a nervous breakdown, but it could be a feature of bipolar. It could happen in postpartum depression. It can happen in a lot of things. So schizophrenia itself is one name for one of the things that used to be called a nervous breakdown.
Oh, but that's very interesting.
They all have their peaks where you're like, oh my God, get this person to the hospital. So what can look like a nervous breakdown could be a bad drug trip. Could be anything.
Oh,
so
okay.
Schizophrenia is a very specific disease among the diagnoses that qualify as mental illness.
So when I was reading this in literature, they probably weren't sophisticated enough to differentiate between the different diseases. Mm-hmm. And women were many times diagnosed with nervous breakdowns just because they were a woman. So that's from what I've read. And so that's very, very interesting. So can you define schizophrenia for us?
Sure. I actually, brought an official diagnosis. Mm-hmm. There are, because I want to get this accurate, and I need to be clear that my book is from the viewpoint of a mother. Mm-hmm. I'm not a doctor. I've certainly made neuroscience my hobby, but pardon me. So schizophrenia is an illness of the mind where it's called a thought disorder, where your inner thoughts kind of take over your outer world. That's my definition. I'm sorry. I'm suffering from post-COVID phlegm.
No problem.
So, schizophrenia is disordered thoughts. I would put it that way. And there are two categories of symptoms that a psychiatrist would need to diagnose it. One side are positive symptoms, which doesn't mean they're good. It means they are symptoms added to your personality. For instance, if you get COVID, a positive symptom is fever or runny nose, or they're added to your personality. A negative symptom is something that is taken away. Like when you have the flu, you may lose your energy. When you have COVID, you may lose your sense of taste or smell. That is a negative symptom. So the positive schizophrenia symptoms often include hallucinations, delusions, things that most of us don't experience except in a nightmare. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So and they often call that psychosis. So if people are like, oh my God, the mafia is after me, they're at the door, or that person's talking about me, those positive symptoms are added to your personality, and they're very frightening. It's like living inside a nightmare. That's how I imagine it. The negative symptoms are just as devastating, and they take away your ability to feel joy, your ability to plan a productive day, your ability to love fully and wholly. So there's a whole list, and I could read them. But in order to diagnose schizophrenia, you have to have one from column A, which includes the hallucinations, at least sometimes, and then many of the negative symptoms for a certain period of time. But it is different from a mood disorder. A mood disorder, your thoughts may be intact, but your mood is out of control. So that's where you have depression. Somebody laying in bed with postpartum depression it's horrible, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that which is worse, but they may not want to get out of bed. They may not be able to get out of bed. They may not be able to see any meaning in life, but generally they're not in psychosis. When you have bipolar, you may have periods of depression and periods of mania where you stay up for 36 hours and you spend a lot of money and you sometimes get a lot done, but then it gets out of control and then it may go into psychosis. But with schizophrenia, even when it's managed, your thoughts can be dulled or disturbed, and there are cognitive deficits as well. So a thought disorder is different from a mood disorder.
You are very educated on this topic.
It has helped me to cope with my son.
Yeah, and I'm thinking I never, just in my everyday life, have made such distinctions between different diagnoses that you're talking about. And I probably have used those words, bipolar or postpartum depression, without putting much thought behind what I was really saying.
Until you have someone in your family that has one of these illnesses, why would we need to learn about it?
Well, that's an interesting comment. Now, going back to this, do you need a doctor to diagnose it, or can a family member?
You have to have an official diagnosis to get medication. So, and that can be very, very difficult. I mean, I have to say my book is more of it's a memoir about the changing relationship with my son as he developed schizophrenia and continues to deal with it. It is a brain illness. So, but I do include chapter guideposts of information so as not to interrupt the story, but that people can read the memoir, and if they're going, well, why won't they take their meds? Well, I know you read it, so it's in gray. There's chapter guideposts about it.
I have to tell you, I found those guideposts extremely interesting, and your technique. I'm hoping, as an aside, you write more books, because this is so well written.
Thank you.
It's unbelievable, and I don't know why it wasn't a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list.
Me neither.
Yeah, and I think we should do something about that.
The book is 12 years old, although the updated version is available as an audiobook. This was traditionally published. You know, these days people can self-publish a book or hybrid publish a book. This was published by Rowman and Littlefield. They've now been bought out by somebody else, can't remember who, and it came out in 2012. And it was published, you learn a lot about publishing when you get a publisher, as a trade book, but it was focused on academics too. I don't know. It sold very well. I had an advance. I made some money on it. If a million people want to go out and buy it, it could shoot right up to number 1 on the list. But it's still available. It's still in print. And thank you for the compliment.
Now, you would find this on Amazon. You sent me a copy of the book, so I didn't have to go look for it. But you could find it on Amazon?
Sure. You can find it on Amazon. When it came out, it was in the bookstores, but it's not a current book anymore, so you probably won't find it in Barnes & Noble, but it's in many libraries. And as I said, it was traditionally published. So when you're traditionally published, you get a review in Publishers Weekly, and you get a Kirkus review and all those things. If you choose to publish it without the help of a traditional publisher, then you have to pay for those things. It's a very different path.
Yes.
But I'm very proud that I had a literary agent. She found a publisher. It got published. They help you with the cover and the design of the book and help you proofread it. Nobody helped me edit it, though. I did that myself. But
well, heck of a job.
Thank you.
Let me just ask you, now, do you think only families who are dealing with schizophrenia would be interested in this book, or do you think it would reach other families?
It's a good question. I see it as a memoir similar to Angela's Ashes, or any memoir of anybody or any family that's been through hardship and come out the other side in a very realistic sense. So when I decided to write the book, a consultant said, how is your book the same as other books, and how is it different? So at the time, there were books about schizophrenia, but they weren't very hopeful. And they weren't from the mother's point of view. So A Beautiful Mind is an example. I read one called The Day the Voices Stopped. It was from the point of view of someone who had schizophrenia. Any book that was written by a parent at the time often ended in the suicide of their loved one or just the loss of their loved one to the streets. Many people with schizophrenia not in treatment, and I'll make a very important point about that in a moment, they wind up in jail or homeless or dead, which is why family support is so important. So I wanted to write a memoir that explained what it was like from the family's point of view. And to include my son in this, I had his permission to use his poetry and to change his name, because his real name is not Ben, but that's the name we chose together. And the book ended in a place of realistic hope. And I know you read the book. The book ends in 2012 with the fact that my son was stable on medication. He was living in a group home because it was better for the family and for him, in my opinion. And he was beginning to go back to college. He was not employed at the time. And at the end of the book, the point I make is he may never be able to work. He has a disability. He has a brain illness. But that doesn't make his life not worth living, and it doesn't make him not worth loving. And that is the point I wanted to make. And that if there was better research, more research, better treatment, there was still hope. So I wanted to write a memoir that ended in hope, but was also realistic about what the family goes through, including my daughter, and what my son might have gone through. So I wanted to spur more attention to be paid to treatment, more empathy for the family and what they've gone through, because there were many decades where families were blamed for schizophrenia. They thought it was a psychological problem, which it is not. It is a brain illness. And I wanted people with schizophrenia who were aware enough to know they had the illness to understand their families better. And I did get some fan mail from people in that situation. And I wanted families to know they were not alone. And I wanted practitioners to understand what the families have gone through by the time they meet them. Because it can be easy to meet family members of someone with severe schizophrenia and go, oh, the family's crazy. No wonder, because we're at our wits' end by the time they meet us.
That is such an interesting point that you just made. Very interesting. I don't want to get off topic and talk about my issues that I've had. I met my sister when I was 48 because she was put in an institution when she was 6 because she was blind and mentally challenged. And I'm currently writing a fictionalized memoir literature on it, and I'm learning a lot. But you, about that whole situation, but you targeted some words. Just because one has these disabilities, it doesn't mean they're not worth loving. I'm getting chills as I'm talking to you. So, but I want to go, I could easily get off topic, and that's not my job. So I want to go back and ask you some of these questions that I had already thought about. Is schizophrenia inherited?
The the most recent theory is that it is related to DNA. It is heritable, but not necessarily inherited.
Define.
So
distinguish.
there's first of all, schizophrenia is a collection of symptoms. There are many different ways to have schizophrenia. So, and the research has shown that it is in the DNA, but often something can trigger it. And so you may have it in your DNA, just like you might have Alzheimer's in your DNA, and it doesn't show up until old age, usually. If it were totally inherited, identical twins would both have it. Mm-hmm. And there's case after case of identical twins where one develops schizophrenia and one does not. So it's not entirely inherited necessarily. If you have family members with schizophrenia, your chances of developing it are greater, but not certain. So am I concerned about my daughter's children? We'll keep our eyes open. Oh. If you have two parents with schizophrenia, your chances are greater, but it's not 100%. So they feel that it's kind of laying in wait in the DNA, and that sometimes what they call a second hit of stress can trigger it. And very often, increasingly, they're finding now that marijuana can trigger it. More and more, especially marijuana, the way it is now. There are many. I have a podcast called Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches, and we often have people on. And I used to think my son used marijuana because his brain was starting to change in his teens and it calmed his brain down. I believed his marijuana use was a result of his schizophrenia. I have changed my mind, as I think people should when they get new information.
Absolutely.
I am a big fan of flip-flopping if you get new information and you're open-minded enough to change your mind.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
So I now believe, and I could do a political aside on that, but I won't. I now believe that had he not used marijuana, he might not have as severe a case as he has. Marijuana, the way it is now, can definitely trigger psychosis and can trigger schizophrenia, I believe.
That is so interesting, especially with all the stores that are popping up for selling it, and the acceptance of it. Was there schizophrenia in your history in with ancestors? Is the word I'm trying to say.
So I often get that question, and often the question is asked because people are going, I want to make sure my kid doesn't get it. So I understand the question. No, there is no schizophrenia in my family. My ex-husband, who is the father of Ben, had alcoholism and drug abuse. And as I began to learn about the illnesses, once I realized my son had schizophrenia, I made it my business to learn everything I could. And if you're watching this or listening to this, I want you to know that there is a class, I mentioned it in the book, very helpful. It's called Family to Family, and it is free, and it's created by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And if you look up your local NAMI chapter, there are family-to-family classes that are offered on Zoom. I teach them. I train people in Connecticut to teach them because it's my way of giving back. Learning about my son's illness was my first line of defense. Didn't fix him, but it helped me to know what was going on and how to cope. And one of the things I learned is that a big symptom of schizophrenia is called anosognosia. And what that means is you don't know you have the illness. That is why so many people homeless on the street with schizophrenia go, I don't need your help, I'm fine, you're crazy. It's not that they're in denial, and it's not that they're being stubborn, it's that they honestly don't believe they have the illness or need the help because their frontal lobes are impaired. So
I really appreciate how you're differentiating between things that I thought I knew and like you just mentioned, homeless people and how could they possibly refuse certain things, but your information is really helping me just understand the whole issue in general. I need to move on because we don't have that much time.
Right.
You say that okay, I'm going to skip a little bit of this around. What does a parent do when they suspect a child has something?
Get educated, keep your eyes open. I know that you asked me to talk about early symptoms, and I will say that my son had the typical onset, which was fine until high school, then started to act weird, and I thought it was drugs, or I thought it was adolescence, because all adolescents get a little bit weird. But it turns out, as I look back now, he had typical prodromal, meaning onset symptoms of schizophrenia. So the biggest piece of advice I could give is if you have it in your family, if things are, first of all, tell your children, if you have schizophrenia in your family, tell your children you are not a person who should ever smoke pot.
Oh, that's a good point.
Educate your children about marijuana, especially if it's in your family. And especially if they're getting pot from their friends or off the street. It is a dangerous drug now. It's not the pot of the 60s. I wish someone had said to me, your son's having problems in school, his grades are slipping, he's getting more isolated, that's not like him, he's starting to say strange things. Maybe it could be the onset of schizophrenia. We don't know for sure because he hasn't had psychosis. But here's a pamphlet. Educate yourself, because the family is the eyes and ears. They can keep your mind open, keep your eyes and ears open so that you know what to look for. The research after research study confirms the earlier you catch it, the better the outcome.
You know what, also, I'm a retired classroom teacher. I taught from grades 1 to college, actually.
Wow.
And I'm thinking when I was teaching high school, I was in the perfect position to see the things that you just mentioned. If a child is acting in one way and then changes, to be aware of it and notice it. And I'm even thinking keeping a log. We were wonderful at keeping logs, and so that we had something to report. Because I think an educator is also the next step after a parent. Who has
Educators, school counselors. I was shocked to find that very often programs to train school psychologists and counselors have serious mental illness as an elective. They should, I would totally advocate for anyone training to be in the school system to have a thorough understanding of what mental illness looks like as it's beginning to develop in kids. And nobody wants to be the bearer of possible bad news. I'm sure nobody wanted to say to me, I hope I'm wrong, but these could be early symptoms of schizophrenia. Maybe not, I hope not, but just in case, here's some information. Keep your eyes open. come back to us if you see any of the following things.
Yeah, contact your doctor. We're running out of time and a lot of questions. And we're going to be putting up your website, which is www.randyek.com. And I highly recommend people go to your website and contact you. I know you give talks on this. They must be fascinating. I'm thinking I would love to attend one. And if you have any other questions, if you'd like to, that we covered today, and you rather contact me and I could contact Randye, you can email me at wiseworks365@gmail.com. Randye, I'd like you to leave us with, at the back of your book, for people who don't want to go through the emails, you have a list of resources that are phenomenal, that are, I would say, first steps if people want to try. Is there one that you recommend more than any, or are you saying try them all?
I would say for mental illness in general, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they these days are focusing a little bit more on more of the mood disorders, but the family to family class will teach you about all of the illnesses, and you learn more than you need and you take what you need. So that would be a resource. If your loved one has schizophrenia, I would recommend I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, because it explains all about anosognosia. I highly recommend that police officers are crisis intervention trained, because what looks like violence could just be psychosis. And the other thing is my podcast, Schizophrenia 3 Moms in the Trenches. We're finishing our 5th season.
How do they find your podcast?
Wherever you get your podcasts, or just Google Schizophrenia 3 Moms. It'll pop up. We have interviewed people with schizophrenia, people with spouses with schizophrenia, siblings. We interviewed our own daughters. We've interviewed psychiatrists, and we've interviewed people to help you get Social Security. There's a lot of topics. And so that is, you can get there's 125 episodes. So you're going to have to pick and choose because they're about an hour each. But look and see, listen to the first few episodes and then listen to the episodes that are helpful. We have, suicide awareness, psychosis awareness, things about marijuana. So those are the resources I would recommend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on
My
Wise
pleasure.
Talk. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm glad that we can help our listeners, perhaps who are struggling with this, maybe move forward with it.
You're not alone. That's the thing I'd say. You're not alone. At least 1 in 5 families deals with a serious mental illness. So
thank you. Thank you so much.